Hi everyone, we're Team 4. Today we will present our analysis titled Surviving the TikTok Effect in Gaming. We will examine how modern digital consumption habits influence user retention within the gaming industry. Our research follows the 8 stages shown on the screen. We look at our topic pivot, initial EDA, and the market volatility from the TikTok effect. Then we cover the 2020 COVID-19 anomaly, followed by our validation, jungle resilience, data cleaning, and final survival strategy. Our project initially began with Minecraft to analyze personal playtime and game art styles. However, we encountered a structural data gap. Available datasets were primarily structured for AI training models and lacked behavioral depth. To resolve this, we pivoted to the Steam platform, shifting our scope to a macro-level analysis covering over 15,000 games. We conducted initial exploratory data analysis, testing multiple hypotheses such as comparing creating ratings against user ratings and playtime against drop rates. The results showed high correlations, but they only reconfirmed common knowledge that highly reviewed games are played longer. Because this does not provide new insights, we hit an analytical dead end. To break through this dead end, we made a strategic pivot in our research question. Instead of looking at predictable ratings, we asked what exactly drives users to drop a game. To investigate the root causes of player abandonment, we screened for behavioral hypotheses: visual friction, digital hoarding, achievement fatigue, and the TikTok effect. We then evaluated the limitations of this hypothesis. Digital hoarding and achievement fatigue were rejected as niche tendencies that lacked market-wide explanatory power. Visual friction offered qualitative value but was impossible to standardize across 15,000 games. Consequently, we narrowed our focus to the year of release as our core signal, establishing our central thesis is the short-form era killing the long-form gaming. Now let's examine our primary macro evidence. To ensure data integrity, we filtered out missing values and zero ownership loss before grouping over 15,000 games by their release year. The time series graph shows a clear pattern. Over the decades, average playtime has steadily declined, while the average drop rate shows a long-term upward trend, supporting our TikTok effect hypothesis. However, this general flow faces an unexpected disruption in 2020, where the drop rate suddenly plummets. This anomaly moves us to our next validation step, checking the impact of global COVID-19 lockdowns.
As mentioned earlier, while we were analyzing the TikTok effect graph, the curve of the graph, which was somewhat consistent with the explanatory power of the hypothesis, suddenly changed around 2020. When we first encountered this changing, our team suspected that whether it was a counterexample to the TikTok effect or an error in the dataset. But after considering the timing, we speculated that the occurrence of the anomaly might be related to COVID-19, and to prove this, we sought to find other related datasets. We sought to prove the relationship between COVID-19 and graph anomalies by examining the cumulative data from Steam charts, which allows us to monitor the trends of Steam players and related posts. When we visualize the number of Steam game players in the dataset, the following graph appeared. To create this, we used R and its ggplot2 library. We configured the x-axis at 1 month intervals to carefully track the monthly changes. Most importantly, we added a red vertical line with the label lockdown began to clearly highlight the exact starting point of the quarantine. As you can see, the number of users surged after the COVID-19 quarantine began. And we also try to compare our original dataset with a Valve dataset tracking up to 2021 and the Steam chart dataset tracking up to 2025. And to analyze the macro player count trends, including seasonal variation and overall period trends. Therefore, we were able to conclude that the COVID-19 situation did indeed temporarily affect the TikTok effect graph. This is because in the drop rates graph we were examining to prove the TikTok effect, we could see a noticeable decrease in drop rates during the COVID-19 quarantine period. And as shown earlier, the number of players will also increase rapidly during the time.
Now I'm going to explain the time series decomposition of our data. As we can see, before the 2016, there was a small but steady increase in the density of growth on players. But when hitting 2016, as we can say, that was the moment that the short format was starting to be more popular. This growth of players just stay still, even starting to decrease. But at the moment of the lockdown, as is easy to see on the tendency, we got a huge increase, a huge peak, moving all our data upwards. And after this moment, even we can still see the same tendency of seasonality it already has, but now it's all more aggressive moves, more movement on players. Now I'm gonna do a brief explanation of some strategies we use and some problems we found on the solutions. First of verification plan was the cross data validation. As we had three different datasets with similar data, we wanted to compare them and to see if we can find some patterns and tendency. Then the next one was the general deep dives. We were curious if, depending on the genre of the game, they were more resilient or were more victim of this TikTok effect that we are looking at. And the last one is the temporary trend analysis, as we think that the main part of our project was to see this if the drop rate changes pre 2016, that was the release of the TikTok, and post. Now for the different obstacles and solutions we found. First of the four was the data inconsistency. As I said before, we tried to cross data validate these three different datasets, but the problem we found was that in each of them they have different definition for ownership and playtime. So our decision was to create a standardized drop rate metric so we can compare these different datasets. The second one was the platform bias. As all our data is focused on Steam, we were scared of uh, being miss different information. So for that, we decided to change our perspective and not focus on the absolute market numbers instead of this use the games. An obstacle was that 2020 anomaly. The COVID-19 dip, as I explained before, was threatened our TikTok effect. So for this, we decided to search specific information from these lockdown movements, so we can see if they really affect our data or not. And the last one was the different nans and outliers, as some of our data were using percentage growth rates, as you can see in the image, because we had the first year, well, the first month the game was released, they didn't have data. We have some very peak growth, some exaggerated, so we decided to delete these name values and to cap the growth and the drop rate at 100%. Now we're gonna analyze the drop rates. So for this part, we decided only took the first 6 months of each game to eliminate the contents of the fanbase of the big games that have been many years on the market, so they were more stable. Also, we only took the negative values in order to just see how fast games now and on the past were dropping on players. So before 2016, the graph show a more stable market, but when entering 2016, as you can see, this 4 points very high. Um, it just increased a lot of the average drop rate on players, and also the confidence interval just shrink on this part. This shows us a binary market where the games had two options, being absolutely hit and survive, or just die. Then when we entered the lockdown in 2020, the market stabilized again, even with less average drop, still proving the point on how the lockdown helped to increase this patience on players. Against plus now game developers have adapted to increase this dopamine on players to give them on like with daily missions, battle pass, just learning the pattern of the players. And then we decided to run a forecast of 5 years. So on the prediction, we got a small constant increase on the average rates, with the confidence rate increasing very fast. And this is just telling us that we are approaching a very volatile market, and that the result of these games will be very unpredictable. Now on this part is the same analysis, but now we're focusing on the standard deviation. It's just the same conclusion, but this helps very much to see how game developers were creating more standardized games. So now we have these games that are more similar each time. That's why we have a more downsloping tendency.
Building on the data, let's unpack exactly why these resilient games are able to keep their players hooked. We've identified four core characteristics that offer experiences short-form media simply cannot replicate. First is autonomy and low fatigue. Single-player and casual games allow players to control their own pacing, completely avoiding the stress and burnout of real-time multiplayer competition. Second is deep immersion. These genres trade instant thrills for high adrenaline, emotional attachment, and long-term narrative tension. Third is intellectual engagement. Instead of the passive consumption you get from scrolling a feed, these games require active problem solving, rewarding the player with a genuine sense of accomplishment. And fourth is originality. Indie titles often reject standardized reward systems in favor of highly unconventional mechanics. The ultimate takeaway is this. To survive in the short attention span era, the winning strategy is to provide irreplaceable, deep, and active experiences. But how do these survival strategies actually reflect in our overall market data? And what statistical traps are hiding in our initial charts? So we know why certain games survive, but how does this actually look in the data? Initially, plotting 20 genres created a cluttered spaghetti chart. To fix this, we pushed the noise to the background and highlighted the overall average. But here's the trap. If you look at the average post 2016, it doesn't dramatically shoot up. Why? Because the market polarized. The fast-paced red group, like shooters and MMOs, saw massive vertical spikes in drop rates. However, the blue group, the deep irreplaceable genres like indies and puzzles, remained completely stable, holding the average down. The real TikTok effect isn't that player drop all games. It's that the market fractured entirely. As you can see in our interactive timeline, tracking the raw data helps us spot trends, but it also exposes significant statistical illusions. First, if you look at the timeline before 2010, the lines fluctuate widely. This is because the sample size back then was so small, creating artificial volatility. Second, look at the red box highlighting 2023. You see sudden spikes even in stable genres. But when we dug into the raw data, we found artifacts. The spike in shooters was just a technical byproduct of the transition to Counter-Strike 2, and the slight rise in RPGs was caused by a flood of ultra-cheap micro-player indie games, skewing the average. This brings us to a critical realization. Raw line charts are vulnerable to noise and cause cognitive friction. So how do we solve this? We filter out the unreliable pre-2010 data entirely and just focusing purely on a solid 16-year time frame from 2010 to 2025. And instead of reading tangled lines, we completely re-engineered how we visualize player retention. Let me show you our final solution in the next slide. Now we realize that tracking all this data, the raw lines, the averages, and polarization is a lot of mental work for any viewer. So we developed an interactive visualization to remove that friction. First, we have the yearly geometric metrics. By arranging 16 years of data into 4x4 grid, you can instantly see the mutation of the market. Notice how the balanced circular polygons of the pre-2016 era suddenly distort into jagged, symmetrical shapes as we hit the TikTok era. Second, our morphing ring consolidates everything into single involving shape. As you scrub through the timeline, the ring flashes neon red at the year 2016 to emphasize the TikTok shockwave. By keeping the market average as a fixed baseline, the viewer can actually feel the market center of mass shifting in real time. It's about bridging the information gap through intuitive design. This brings us to our final conclusion. The TikTok effect has permanently polarized the market. So how do we survive? Not by being faster. We survive by offering what a 15-second video never can. Irreplaceable depth. This means focusing on three things. First, long-term immersion. Second, active intellectual engagement. And third, leaning into the stable genres like indies and RPGs that our data proves are immune to this trend in the dopamine era. The best games don't fight for our attention, they just earn it. Thank you for listening.